ethics is about what's right and wrong. We've covered the view that what's right and wrong depends on cultural norms. We've discussed some hard cases that involve hypothetical thought experiments like the trolley problem. We've also seen a couple of general moral theories about what makes any given action morally right or wrong. Our last topic is going to bring us uh, to something that's a little more practical and applies um, the principles of ethics and morality to the question of whether abortion is ever morally permissible. This is a really standard argument for the claim that abortion is always morally wrong. We're going to call this the right to life argument. You may have encountered something like this. The argument starts with the premise that every fetus is a person with a right to life. And then the second premise says it's always morally wrong to kill a person with a right to life. I mean, that's just what the right to life is. The right to life is something that cannot be violated in a way that is morally permissible. So to kill something with a right to life is always wrong. From these two premises, it follows that it's morally wrong to kill a fetus. Now, the additional small claim that's needed to deliver the conclusion about abortion is just that abortion is the killing of a fetus, which is pretty uncontroversial, especially given the mechanisms, whether it's chemical abortion or whether it's surgical abortion. It does seem to be the intentional, causal initiation of a sequence that results in directly the death of the fetus. So it's an act of killing. Um, Now, this first premise, every fetus is a person with the right to life, was for quite a while in ethics and also in public policy the locus of the debate around whether abortion is morally permissible. The thought was, well, if a fetus is a person like you and me, and it has an inviolable right to life, then of course abortion is immoral. And so the dividing line between the pro choicers and the pro life crowd tended to be over the question of whether or not a fetus is a person. They offer different answers to what we can call the fetal personhood question, which is the question of when a fetus becomes a person. Typically, the pro life position is, or certainly was, that personhood begins exactly when the fetus comes into existence. There's a perfect coincidence between the biological humanity of the individual fetus and its status as something with rights, something that deserves protection, and something that is, for all intents and purposes, morally just like you and me. Um, the pro choice position tended to be, and to some extent still largely is, that personhood, whatever it is something more deeply related to our autonomy, our ability to live and breathe independently of others, but then also our conscious capacities, our ability to think, our ability to feel pain, for example. Depending on which of those two you emphasize, the answer to the fetal personhood question will come out a little bit later, or quite a bit later, than the pro life view says. So some pro choice advocates will place personhood somewhere toward the beginning of the third trimester, where, roughly speaking, the ability to feel pain has developed with the upper brain of the fetus. Some pro choice advocates will place personhood much closer to birth, roughly when the fetus is viable and able to live independently of the mother. One challenge for a viability criterion of personhood is that whether a fetus is viable in that sense seems to be something that depends entirely on the state of our technology. So, viability tends to, with each advancement in medical technology, be moved backwards a little bit. So, less and less developed fetuses are becoming more and more viable and able to live on their own. But personhood, whatever it is, doesn't seem like the sort of thing that should depend on what technological developments there are. Personhood is something that a thing either has in and of itself or doesn't. It shouldn't matter whether or not some new technology is invented as to whether or not you're a person. Um, Whatever you think about exactly where to put the personhood of the fetus in its development, whether it's at the moment of conception, whether it's at birth, whether it's some viability line, whether it's something about consciousness. The debate for quite a while was, well, if we can establish that the fetus is a person, then that just shows that abortion can never be permissible, because of course it's always wrong to kill a person with the right to life. That much, at least, both sides agreed on. Enter in 1971 Judith Jarvis Thompson's piece, A Defense of Abortion. Sort of culturally, this is interesting. This is coming a few years before the Supreme Court hands down the Roe v. Wade decision. And I think that this was very much in the air at the time, and being discussed by jurists, by philosophers, and by ethicists, exactly how to approach the question of abortion, because it was increasingly a topic that the public cared about, and these cases were making their way up through the courts. Now, the title of her piece is A Defense of Abortion. She has, I think, whether you agree with her argument or not, there is something very genius about what Thompson does in this piece. While most of the pro-choice advocates, people who thought that abortion is morally permissible in some cases, tended to argue that the pro-life position on the nature of personhood was wrong. They tended to say, here's a reason to think the fetus isn't a person. Thompson says, well, what if we grant that premise for the sake of argument? Would it even follow that abortion is immoral? She says this, for it seems to me to be of great interest to ask what happens if, for the sake of argument, we allow the premise. So the genius of her piece is she argues that even if the fetus is a person with a right to life, it still doesn't follow that abortion is morally wrong. In a way, she's granting the pro-lifer the strongest arrow in their quiver and saying, hey, you can have that and I can still beat you. So how exactly? Well, she says, interestingly, this second premise of the pro-life argument, which says that it's always morally wrong to kill a person with a right to life, that one looked like the really airtight one. But she says that's actually not as obviously true as you might think. And in fact, she's going to argue that that premise is false. It's not always morally wrong to kill a person with a right to life. She's not advocating for murder, so what is she saying? Well, here is the probably the most famous part of her article, which is this thought experiment. It's known as the violinist case. Here's what she says. You wake up in the morning and find yourself back to back in bed with an unconscious violinist, a famous unconscious violinist. He has been found to have a fatal kidney ailment, and the Society of Music Lovers has canvassed all the available medical records and found that you alone have the right blood type to help. They have therefore kidnapped you, and last night the violinist's circulatory system was plugged into yours so that your kidneys can be used to extract poisons from his blood as well as your own. Okay, so that is the thought experiment. You wake up and you look around and you see there's all of these plugs and tubes coming out of you. You're laying in a hospital bed, you're groggy, your head is pounding, and there's one big tube coming out of your abdomen where it seems to be draining some fluid from one of your organs. You're like, what is going on? And you look across from you and there's this guy and he's holding a violin. And you say, what? Who are you? What's happening? And you notice that this tube is connected from you to him. The doctor comes in and says to you, don't panic. Here's what happened. The Society of Music Lovers kidnapped you yesterday, and they are now using your kidneys to keep Mr. Itzhak Perlman here, this famous violinist, alive. And he's an incredibly valuable piece of society. His music is beautiful, has entertained many people, and he's made sort of irreplaceable contributions to the public. So this man is not just any old person, he's a really valuable person. I think this is why she chooses the violinist as her example. And the doctor explains to you that if you unplug yourself from the violinist, he will die. So his life depends on yours. So there are really two versions of the violinist case. Version one, imagine that you need to stay plugged into the violinist for the next 9 months. Once those 9 months are up, you can safely unplug from him and he will be alive and walk away, very grateful, and you'll never see him again. and you'll be fine too. Here's another version though. Version 2, you will die if you stay plugged into the violinist. So in this version, you can save him potentially, but if you do and you stay plugged in, it's going to kill you. Question. First question is this. What would you do? Let's just focus on version 1, where you have to stay plugged in for 9 months. And you'll live, he'll live, but it's 9 months of your time. You know, if you want to go anywhere, you have to drag this man with you. And it's nice at first that he's playing this music, but then it gets a little irritating. And you have to talk to him. And it's changing your body because your muscles are atrophying in this bed next to him. It's, of course, quite expensive to continue this. It's emotionally taxing. You don't want to do this. So the first question is, what would you do? Would you unplug yourself from him, knowing that this will result in his death? A related question is, whatever you decide, what is the morally right thing to do? So if somebody else made a different decision, so for example, if you think, look, I would stay plugged in, is that because you think it would be immoral for you to unplug? And would it be immoral for anyone to unplug from the violinist? Relatedly, what would you do in the second version? And what is the morally appropriate thing to do here? I mean, you're being asked to not just sacrifice 9 months, but to sacrifice your very life for this stranger. And many people, I suspect, will have the reaction that certainly in the second version, you are not morally required to stay attached to a person and keep them alive if in doing so, your own life is at risk. It would be permissible for you to unplug, thereby killing the violinist. Here's what Thompson says. Let us look again at the case of you and the violinist. There you are in bed with the violinist, and the director of the hospital says to you, it's almost distressing, and I deeply sympathize, but you see this is putting an additional strain on your kidneys, and you'll be dead within the month. So this is the second version. But you have to stay where you are all the same, because unplugging you would be directly killing an innocent violinist, and that's murder, and that's impermissible. Here's what Thompson says about version 2. If anything in the world is true, it is that you do not commit murder. You do not do what is impermissible if you reach around to your back and unplug yourself from that violinist to save your life. So I think most people encountering version 2 will agree with Thompson. You are not morally obligated to stay plugged into the violinist, and it's not wrong for you to kill him under these circumstances. The more interesting question, and the one I want you to consider for yourself, is what about version 1, where it's 9 months, and your life is not under threat, but 9 months of your life and your health and your emotional well-being are under threat? Are you obligated morally to give up nearly a year of your precious life for this stranger? That is the question for you to consider. Now, Thompson says no. Her reaction to both version 1 and version 2 is it would be a great heroic act of self-sacrifice for you to stay plugged in. It would be morally wonderful, but it is above and beyond the call of duty in both cases. You are not morally required to stay plugged into the violinist, even if you're only being asked to sacrifice 9 months of your life. It is too much to ask of a person. And so it is not morally wrong for you to kill this violinist by unplugging from him, either in version 1 or version 2. Notice that if she's right, what follows from that is that the second step of the right to life argument is false. It is, in fact, morally permissible, if she's right, to kill a person with the right to life. Like the violinist. If you're in a violinist type case, it's permissible to kill. Now, of course, it doesn't follow that it's always okay to kill, but in that sort of situation where you find yourself hooked up to another person who's using your body against your will, under those circumstances, it is perfectly acceptable from a moral perspective for you to kill. So premise 2 is false. This is the first use that Thompson puts the violinist thought experiment to. She's using it as a counterexample to the second premise, or a counterexample to this general thesis of the pro-lifer that it's always morally wrong to kill a person with the right to life. She says, here's an example where we have a person, clearly, they have the right to life, no one disputes that, but it's not morally wrong to kill them. So that general principle is false. This is not the only function for her of the violinist thought experiment. She then goes on to use this thought experiment as the basis of an argument for the moral permissibility of abortion. Here's the violinist argument. It starts with the premise that it's not morally wrong to unplug yourself from the violinist. Thompson thinks that's the case in both versions, both version 1 and version 2, and she hopes that your intuitions, your moral reactions will be the same as hers in those two cases. Forget about abortion, she's saying. Let's just focus on this violinist thought experiment. Would it be wrong to unplug yourself? If you agree with her that it would be, though tragic, permissible for you to do, you accept her first premise. Here's her second premise. If it's not morally wrong to unplug yourself from the violinist, then it's not morally wrong to abort a fetus. So this is a conditional. It says that if it is permissible to unplug from the violinist, then the same goes for aborting a fetus. From these two, we can use modus ponens to conclude, therefore, it is not morally wrong to abort a fetus, or equivalently, it's morally permissible to abort. This is a valid argument, and so the question is, why should we believe the premises? We already talked about premise one. One objection to premise one is just, I don't agree that it would be morally permissible to unplug myself in either case. I think I'm obligated to stay. Most people don't react that way, but having taught this quite a few times, a handful of people do. And if that is your reaction, then you reject premise one and you think this argument's unsound. But if you think that, in fact, it would not be wrong for me to unplug from the violinist, then the next question is, well, why think that that has anything to do with abortion? Why think that they're related in the way that premise two says? I'm just going to give you, you don't need to know exactly each of these steps, but I'm going to give you a little valid defense of premise two. Remember, premise two is, if it is not morally wrong to unplug from the violinist, then it's not wrong to abort a fetus. Here's the first step of this defense. Listen, unplugging from the violinist is analogous to aborting a fetus in all morally relevant respects. What this is saying is that the thought experiment of the violinist is an analogy for abortion. I mean, what you have is not any old analogy, but a really sharp one where all of the morally important factors are held fixed across the two examples. So in the one case, you have the violinist, who we're assuming is a person, who we're assuming has the right to life, and furthermore, who depends for his very life on your body. In the other case, we have another being, which we're assuming for the sake of argument is also a person, which also has the right to life, and furthermore depends for its very life on the body of the mother. Those are the morally relevant aspects of the two situations, and they're identical. The second premise says that any two actions that are analogous in all morally relevant respects have the same moral status. What that means is that if you have two cases that don't differ from one another in any morally relevant ways, then if one is right, so is the other, and if one is wrong, then so is the other. This is a treat like cases alike from a moral perspective principle. I mean, wouldn't it be weird if you had two exactly indiscernible cases of, let's say, killing, and you couldn't see any difference between them, but for some reason it turned out that one is right and one is wrong? Then what morality is would be like unintelligible to us. So that's what's behind this second step in this defense of premise two. It follows that if it is not morally wrong to unplug from the violinist, then it's not morally wrong to abort a fetus, which is our second premise. Now, really here, I think that second step of this defense, no one should really reject lest you make moral facts sort of float free in an objectionable way from underlying natural facts or physical facts that you could describe about the case. So assuming that you should treat like cases alike morally, the only remaining place to push back is the claim that unplugging from the violinist is analogous to aborting a fetus in all morally relevant respects. In subsequent discussions of Thompson's piece, the main objections were really to this analogy claim. Here I'm representing as 2.1, the first step in the defense of premise two. Pro-life people and people who just didn't buy this argument, I mean, you can be pro-choice and not think this is a good argument, tended to say, hold on, I'm not sure that unplugging from the violinist is, after all, analogous to abortion in all relevant respects. So here's one possible disanalogy that Thompson does address in her piece. You might say, well, here's a really important difference between the two cases. The role of consent. So in the violinist case, it starts with a kidnapping. You are kidnapped by the Society of Music Lovers against your will, and you wake up completely without your consent, attached to this stranger. The idea is that is the ground of why it's permissible for you to then say, no thanks, I'm out of here. But so the claim goes, in the case of pregnancy, there is consent. Or at least, here's the thought, there is consent to the sex act that resulted in the pregnancy. So if you consent to sex and you get pregnant, then you have effectively thereby consented to the fetus taking up residence, so to speak, in your body. It would then be impermissible for you, after giving it permission, to revoke that permission and kill it. That is the alleged disanalogy. Now, there are a few, I think, decent replies here. Thompson focuses on the second one, although she makes this first point as well. I mean, the first thing to note is that, of course, many pregnancies, or some pregnancies, are not the result of consensual sex. I mean, baked into the description there was that the pregnant person had consented to sex. I mean, people get pregnant as a result of rape. That does happen. So, one thing to notice is that if the pro-lifer concedes that in cases where the originating act was non-consensual, it's permissible to kill, they thereby are admitting that it is not always wrong to abort. Namely, they're carving out an exception for cases of rape. And Thompson is sort of at pains to stress that her target is the sort of unrestricted pro-life position. And if the pro-lifer resists by stressing this consent point, she says, well, you've at least conceded to me that there are some cases in which abortion is permissible. I think a better, or maybe more interesting reply is this. Consenting to sex is not usually consenting to pregnancy. I mean, very often, of course, people consent to sex, but they explicitly do not consent to being pregnant. This is the whole point of birth control. And Thompson's view is, yes, you consent to sex. No, unless you're trying to get pregnant, you're not consenting to pregnancy. So in cases where somebody uses contraception, but the contraception fails and they get pregnant anyway, in those cases, according to Thompson, it is still morally permissible to abort the fetus because you did not consent to the fetus taking residence in your body. To support this claim, she gives us another thought experiment. This is a sort of strange and fascinating thought experiment, and I'll read it for you. Again, suppose it were like this. People seeds drift about in the air like pollen, and if you open your windows, one may drift in and take root in your carpets or upholstery. You don't want children, so you fix up your windows with a fine mesh screen, the very best you can buy. As it happens, however, on very, very rare occasions, as does happen, one of the screens is defective, and a seed drifts in and takes root. Does the person plant who now develops have a right to use your house? So you can see what the analogy is supposed to be here. We've now moved from the violinist into a different thought experiment that contains more exact analogies for consensual sex that is using contraception that then fails despite the couple's best efforts. The screens that are carefully put in place in order that the person seeds not drift into the house are analogous to contraception. The person seed who ends up taking root and growing in the house despite the couple's best effort to use screens to block is analogous to an unwanted pregnancy. And the people seeds floating around on the outside are, I guess, analogous to sperm. So the question is, suppose you find yourself in this circumstance. Would you unplug, which in this case would be uproot, one of these person seeds? And have you given it permission to find its way into your house and start, living in your house for the next 9 months? You got to feed this thing. You got to take care of it. It's talking to you. You're like, shut up. This is weird. I didn't invite you in. Would it be immoral for you to uproot the person seed, knowing that in doing so you'll be killing it? Thompson thinks it would not be morally wrong for you to uproot this person seed, even though knowing that in doing so you will be killing it. Analogously, so here's the thought, it would not be wrong for somebody who had consensual sex using contraception and ended up with an unwanted pregnancy to abort. That is a sort of revenge version of Thompson's violinist argument using the person seed thought experiment. I'm not going to put it up in premise conclusion form. I'll let you sort of think about how to do that on your own. Finally, I think there's one more thing that we can say about how Thompson is using these thought experiments. Let's go back to the violinist thought experiment. She's also using that thought experiment as, I think, a really useful device for helping us to clarify our intuitions about what the right to life is, what it's not, what it entitles a person to, and what it doesn't entitle a person to. Here's what she says. This is a notorious and sort of silly example. If I am sick unto death, and the only thing that will save my life is the touch of Henry Fonda's cool hand on my fevered brow, then all the same I have no right to be given the touch of Henry Fonda's cool hand on my fevered brow. So this, of course, never happens, and it's silly, but her point is a good one, which is that if for some reason you, and indeed your very life, require the physical assistance of another person who, let's say, lives on the other side of the country, who you don't know, you require their body to be there to touch your fevered brow, I think her thought is it would be a great heroic service for them to do that for you. But if they decline to do so, they have done nothing wrong. I am arguing, she says, only that having a right to life does not guarantee having either a right to be given the use of or a right to be allowed continued use to another person's body, even if one needs it for life itself. So the right to life will not serve the opponents of abortion in the very simple and clear way in which they seem to have thought it would. So the big picture point here is, for Thompson, she thinks, look, yes, the right to life is a thing, but the right to life doesn't give you whatever you happen to need to stay alive. You may need quite a few things in order to stay alive. The mere fact that you have the right to life doesn't thereby give you the right to those things. Most importantly, if you happen to need another person's body to continue to stay alive, you don't thereby have the right to use their body, even though you do in fact have the right to life. And as a result, so her claim is, they are not violating your right to life by withholding their body from your use. Analogously, a pregnant person is not violating the fetus's right to life, if indeed the fetus has it, by withholding her body from the use of the fetus.